The exhausted young mother fought to stay awake as the city bus rumbled through the rainy night, her infant daughter finally asleep against her chest. When her heavy eyelids betrayed her and she nodded off on a stranger's shoulder, she never imagined she'd wake up in a mansion with chandeliers overhead instead of the familiar stained ceiling of the homeless shelter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain pounded mercilessly against the windows of the bus as Sophie clutched her 3-month-old daughter Emma tightly against her chest. The steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and the gentle vibration of the vehicle had finally lulled the fussy infant to sleep after what felt like hours of crying. Sophie's body ached with a bone-deep weariness that came from months of struggling to survive on her own. "Just a few more stops, sweetheart," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the aging bus engine. Her breath created a small fog on the window as she leaned her head against the cool glass. Outside, the lights of Portland blurred through the rain-streaked windows, each droplet transforming the city into a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to mock her with their beauty, when her own life had become so gray. Sophie was only 25, but the past year had carved deep shadows beneath her once bright hazel eyes and hollowed her cheeks in a way that made her appear much older. Her naturally wavy auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, unwashed for days due to the unreliable hot water at the shelter. The oversized gray sweater she wore had been a donation, its sleeves too long, but at least it was warm, covering the increasingly loose jeans that hung from her diminishing frame. The night bus was nearly empty at this late hour, just a handful of passengers scattered throughout, night shift workers, a few students with backpacks, and Sophie, making her way back from the hospital where she'd taken Emma for a persistent cough that had frightened her enough to spend her last few dollars on bus fare. The doctor had assured her it was just a mild cold, nothing serious, but the relief had cost her the money she'd been saving for a week's worth of diapers. Sophie had been on her own since she was 20, when her mother lost her battle with cancer. She'd managed well enough, working as a paralegal while taking online classes toward a law degree, determined to create a better life for herself. Then she met Ryan, a charismatic software developer who promised her the world. By the time she discovered his addiction to online gambling and the mountain of debt he'd hidden from her, she was already 7 months pregnant when Ryan walked out 3 weeks after Emma was born. He took what little savings they had left, leaving Sophie with an eviction notice and a newborn baby. Now, as the bus lurched to a stop to let on a new passenger, Sophie struggled to keep her eyes open. The last 48 hours had been particularly brutal. Emma's coughing had kept them both awake. The shelter had been at capacity, forcing them to spend one night in a church basement, and Sophie had picked up an extra shift at the convenience store where she worked part-time, stocking shelves during the pre-dawn hours while a kind elderly woman from the shelter watched Emma. The new passenger settled into the seat beside Sophie, but she barely registered his presence, too exhausted to even look up. Emma stirred slightly against her chest, and Sophie automatically began the gentle rocking motion that usually kept her daughter calm. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the bus in a hypnotic rhythm that made Sophie's eyelids grow impossibly heavy. "Rough night?" came a deep, gentle voice from beside her. Sophie managed a slight nod, not wanting to be rude but too tired for conversation. "Just taking my daughter home from the doctor," she murmured, her voice rough with fatigue. "Is she going to be okay?" the stranger asked, genuine concern evident in his tone. "Just a cold," Sophie replied, forcing her eyes open to glance at her seatmate for the first time. The man beside her was probably in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair that somehow looked both perfectly styled and slightly tousled. He wore a charcoal gray suit that even Sophie's untrained eye could tell was expensive, though he'd loosened his blue tie and unfastened his top button. His eyes were a warm brown that crinkled slightly at the corners, suggesting he smiled often. What struck Sophie most was that despite his obvious wealth, there was nothing condescending in his expression as he looked at her disheveled appearance. "What are you doing on the night bus?" she asked before she could stop herself, immediately regretting the question. "Sorry, that's none of my business." The man chuckled, a warm sound that somehow made the cold bus feel less hostile. "My car broke down a few blocks back. My driver's on vacation, and apparently, I've forgotten how to call a taxi like a normal person. Thought I'd just catch the bus home since it was only a few stops away." Sophie nodded, fighting to keep her eyes open. The gentle swaying of the bus combined with her exhaustion was making it nearly impossible to stay awake. "You look like you haven't slept in days," the man observed, his voice gentle rather than judgmental. "It's okay to rest your eyes for a bit. I'll make sure you don't miss your stop." "Which one is it?" "Pine Street," Sophie mumbled, already feeling herself drifting. "Shelter doesn't lock the doors until midnight." If the man reacted to her mention of the shelter, Sophie didn't notice. Her head nodded forward, then jerked back up as she fought against sleep. "Here," the man said quietly, shifting slightly in his seat. "You can lean on my shoulder if you want. I promise I'm not a creep, just a fellow tired traveler." Under normal circumstances, Sophie would never have accepted such an offer from a stranger. But normal had ceased to exist in her world months ago, and the prospect of even a few minutes of rest was too tempting to resist. With Emma secure in her arms, Sophie cautiously leaned her head against the man's shoulder. His suit jacket was soft, and he smelled faintly of expensive cologne and coffee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes already closing. "Just for a minute." "Take all the time you need," came the reply. But Sophie was already drifting into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. The gentle rocking of the bus faded away, and Sophie fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, one hand still protectively cradling Emma's small body against her chest. She didn't feel the bus stopping, didn't register the stranger carefully supporting her as he guided her off the vehicle, didn't notice being placed gently into a car that appeared as if summoned by magic. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she felt safe enough to truly rest. When Sophie finally began to stir, it was the unfamiliar softness beneath her that first penetrated her consciousness. The shelter's thin mattresses never felt this comfortable, never cradled her aching body like a cloud. Her eyes fluttered open, then widened in confusion and alarm as she took in her surroundings. She was lying on a plush cream-colored sofa in a spacious room with high ceilings and large windows that revealed a spectacular view of the city lights twinkling through the rain. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, casting a warm, gentle light throughout the space. Expensive-looking artwork adorned the walls, and a fireplace crackled softly across from her, its flames dancing and casting flickering shadows. Sophie bolted upright, panic flooding her system. Where was Emma? Her arms felt empty, the familiar weight of her daughter gone. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs as she frantically scanned the room. "Emma?" she called out, her voice tight with fear. "Emma." "She's right here," came that same deep voice from the bus, now familiar yet somehow more unsettling in these strange surroundings. The man from the bus appeared in a doorway, holding Emma carefully in his arms. The baby was awake but calm, staring up at the stranger with curious eyes as he gently bounced her. Relief flooded through Sophie, quickly followed by confusion and suspicion. "What is this place? Why did you bring us here?" Sophie demanded, rising from the sofa on unsteady legs. "I need to get back to the shelter before they lock the doors." The man carefully approached her, moving slowly as if understanding her fear. "I'm sorry if I frightened you. My name is Nathan Reed. You fell asleep on the bus. and when I tried to wake you at your stop, you were so deeply asleep that you barely stirred. Your daughter started fussing, and I made a judgment call." He looked genuinely contrite. Perhaps not the best one, in retrospect. Sophie reached for Emma, and Nathan immediately handed the baby over. Sophie checked her daughter, thoroughly relieved to find her clean, warm, and apparently content. "You changed her diaper," Sophie observed, noticing the fresh diaper that wasn't from her meager supply. Nathan shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "My assistant has a 1-year-old. She keeps emergency supplies here for when she brings him to work. I'm not completely hopeless with babies. I have nieces and nephews." Sophie cradled Emma close, still wary but slightly less frightened. "That doesn't explain why you brought us to." She gestured around at the opulent room. "Wherever this is." "My home," Nathan said simply. "It seemed cruel to wake you when you were so exhausted, and even crueler to leave you at a bus stop in the rain. I have plenty of guest rooms, and I thought you and your daughter might benefit from a night of proper rest." Sophie stared at him, trying to process his words. "You're telling me you brought 2 complete strangers to your home just because I fell asleep on your shoulder on a bus?" Nathan ran a hand through his hair, mussing it further. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather impulsive. I'm not in the habit of collecting strays, I assure you." His expression grew more serious. "But when you mentioned the shelter, and I saw how exhausted you were, trying to take care of your daughter all alone, I couldn't just walk away." Sophie's instinct for self-preservation warred with her desperate need for help. "Who are you, really?" "Like I said, Nathan Reed, I run Reed Innovations. We develop medical technology." He stated this without pride or expectation of recognition, simply as a fact. Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Even in her isolated state, she'd heard of Reed Innovations. The company was one of the largest employers in Portland, known for its cutting-edge medical devices and generous community outreach programs. "You're a CEO," she said flatly, suddenly feeling even more out of place in this luxurious home. "And you were riding the city bus at 11 p.m. Nathan smiled wryly. "Even CEOs have car trouble. And I find public transportation keeps me grounded. Helps me remember that not everyone has the privileges I do." Emma began to fuss in Sophie's arms, making the small whimpering sounds that usually preceded a full-blown crying session. Sophie bounced her gently, but the baby's face scrunched up, her discomfort evident. "She's probably hungry," Sophie said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "I need to feed her." "Of course," Nathan said immediately. "Would you like some privacy? Or are you hungry as well? I can have something prepared for you." The mention of food made Sophie's empty stomach clench painfully. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal, subsisting mainly on vending machine snacks and the shelter's simple fare. Still, her pride rebelled at the thought of accepting more charity from this stranger. "I should go," she said, though the thought of venturing back out into the rainy night with a hungry Emma made her heart sink. "The shelter is closed." By now, Nathan finished gently. "It's past midnight." Sophie's heart sank as she realized he was right. The shelter's strict policies meant she'd be locked out until morning. With no money for a motel and the temperature dropping, she had nowhere to go. Nathan seemed to read her thoughts. "Stay the night," he said, his tone making it clear it was an offer, not a command. "There's a guest suite with its own bathroom. You can feed your daughter, get some rest, and in the morning, my housekeeper can prepare breakfast. Then I'll have my driver take you wherever you need to go." Sophie hesitated, torn between suspicion and desperate need. "Why would you do this? For someone you don't even know?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. 15 years ago, I was where you are now," he finally said, surprising Sophie. "Not with a baby, but homeless, desperate, at the end of my rope. Someone took a chance on me, gave me a place to stay for a night that turned into a week then. A month, it changed everything. His eyes met hers steadily. Sometimes people just need a moment to catch their breath. Emma's fussing increased, her little face reddening with hunger and distress. Sophie looked down at her daughter, then back at this strange man who claimed to understand her situation in a way most people couldn't. "One night," she conceded finally. "And I'll pay you back somehow." Relief crossed Nathan's features. "The guest suite is this way," he said, gesturing toward a hallway. "There are clean towels in the bathroom if you'd like to shower, and I can find you something more comfortable to sleep in." Sophie followed him through the spacious apartment, trying not to gape at the obvious wealth surrounding her. The guest suite he led her to was larger than the entire studio apartment she'd shared with Ryan, with a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linens, a sitting area with plush armchairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered the same spectacular city view. "The bathroom's through there," Nathan said, pointing to a door. "Take all the time you need. If you're hungry after you feed Emma, just press that intercom button by the bed, and I'll bring you something to eat." "Thank you," Sophie said softly, still overwhelmed by the situation but too exhausted to question it further. Nathan nodded, stepping back toward the door. "Good night, Sophie. Things will look better in the morning." As he turned to leave, a thought struck Sophie. "I never told you my name," she said, sudden wariness returning. Nathan paused, looking genuinely surprised. "You did on the bus, right before you fell asleep." Had she? Sophie couldn't remember. The last few hours on the bus were a blur of exhaustion and worry. It was possible she'd introduced herself without even remembering it. Or perhaps he was lying. But for what purpose? "Good night, Mr. Reed," she said finally, deciding to tackle that mystery after she'd fed Emma and possibly slept for more than 2 consecutive hours. As the door closed behind him, Sophie looked down at her daughter, who was now crying in earnest, little fists waving in hunger. "What have we gotten ourselves into, Em?" she whispered, moving to sit in one of the plush armchairs to feed her. As Emma nursed contentedly, Sophie tried to make sense of the bizarre turn her evening had taken. One moment she was on a city bus, dreading another night at the crowded shelter, and the next she was in a millionaire's guest suite, being offered kindness she couldn't begin to understand. People didn't do things like this without expecting something in return. That was one of life's hard lessons Sophie had learned well before Ryan's betrayal had reinforced it. Yet there had been something in Nathan Reed's eyes when he spoke of his own past struggles that rang true. After Emma had eaten her fill and fallen back asleep, Sophie gently laid her in the center of the massive bed, building a protective barrier of pillows around her tiny form. Then, unable to resist the lure of a hot shower, she slipped into the adjoining bathroom. The bathroom was like something from a luxury hotel, with marble countertops, plush towels, and an array of expensive toiletries. The shower had multiple jets and steaming hot water that seemed to wash away not just the grime of days without proper bathing facilities, but some of the weight of worry she'd been carrying. When she emerged, wrapped in a soft towel, she found that someone had left a set of pajamas and a robe on a chair just inside the bedroom door. They were women's clothes, simple but obviously expensive, the tag still attached. Had Nathan planned this, or did he regularly have female guests who needed emergency clothing? Too tired to puzzle it out, Sophie slipped into the pajamas, which were slightly too large but gloriously soft against her skin. She checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully, then pressed the intercom button as Nathan had suggested. His voice came through almost immediately. "Yes, Sophie?" "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, suddenly feeling foolish. "You're not bothering me," he assured her. "Are you hungry?" The gentle question broke through her remaining reserve. "Starving," she admitted. "I'll bring something up." "Any allergies or dislikes?" "No, anything is fine, thank you." Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, watching Emma sleep while she waited. The baby looked so peaceful, her tiny chest rising and falling in the deep, untroubled sleep of infancy. For the first time in months, Sophie allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. A soft knock at the door announced Nathan's arrival. When Sophie opened it, she found him holding a tray laden with food, a steaming bowl of pasta, a small salad, bread still warm from the oven, and what looked like homemade chocolate chip cookies. "I hope this is okay," he said, setting the tray on a small table near one of the armchairs. "I'm not much of a cook, but pasta I can manage." "You made this yourself?" Sophie asked, surprised. Nathan nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "My housekeeper would have done better, but she's not here at this hour. It's nothing fancy." To Sophie, who had been subsisting on convenience, store sandwiches and shelter meals, it looked like a feast. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Thank you." Nathan shifted awkwardly, as if unsure whether to stay or go. "Will you be comfortable here? Is there anything else you need?" Sophie shook her head, touched by his concern. "This is more than enough, more than I could have imagined this morning." He nodded, apparently satisfied. "Well, good night then." Again. As he turned to leave, Sophie called after him softly, mindful of Emma sleeping nearby. "Mr. Reed, Nathan. Why did you really bring us here? The truth, please." Nathan paused, his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back to face her, his expression was solemn. "When you fell asleep on the bus, you said something in your sleep. You said, 'Please, just one more chance.' It reminded me of something I said once, a long time ago, when I thought I'd run out of options." His eyes met hers steadily. "Everyone deserves one more chance, Sophie." With that, he closed the door softly behind him, leaving Sophie alone with her sleeping daughter and a tray of food that represented more kindness than she'd experienced in months. As she ate the simple but delicious meal, Sophie's mind raced with questions. Who was Nathan Reed, really? What had happened in his past that made him understand her situation so well? And most importantly, what would happen in the morning when this surreal interlude came to an end? For now, though, with a full stomach and the prospect of sleeping in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Sophie decided that those questions could wait until morning. As she slipped between the crisp sheets beside her peacefully sleeping daughter, she allowed herself to sink into the comfort surrounding them both. For the first time since Ryan had walked out, leaving her alone with a newborn and nowhere to go, Sophie fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever Nathan Reed's motives, whatever lay ahead, for tonight at least, they were safe, warm, and cared for. And sometimes, that was enough of a miracle to be going on with. Sophie awoke to sunlight streaming through windows much larger than any she'd seen in months. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The softness beneath her was too luxurious for the shelter's thin mattresses, the silence too complete without the sounds of other families stirring. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The bus, falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder, waking up in a mansion. She turned quickly to check on Emma, relief washing through her when she found her daughter still sleeping peacefully beside her, tiny hands curled into fists above her head. The digital clock on the knitstand read 9:17 a.m., the latest Sophie had slept since before Emma was born. A soft knock at the door pulled her attention away from her sleeping child. Wrapping herself in the plush robe that had been provided, Sophie padded across the thick carpet to answer it. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun stood on the other side, her expression warm but professional. She wore simple black pants and a crisp white blouse with a small gold pin that read Reed Residence on the lapel. "Good morning, Miss Sophie," the woman said with a gentle smile. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Reed's housekeeper. I hope you and your little one slept well." "Yes, thank you," Sophie replied, pulling the robe tighter around herself, suddenly acutely aware of her situation, a stranger in an expensive home, wearing borrowed clothes. Mr. Reed asked me to let you know that breakfast is ready whenever you'd like to come down. No rush at all." Margaret's eyes crinkled kindly at the corners. "He also asked me to tell you that he set aside some things for your baby diapers, formula, a few clothes. Nothing fancy, just practical items he thought might help." Sophie felt a complicated mixture of gratitude and discomfort. The items Margaret mentioned were precisely what she needed most things. She'd been struggling to provide for Emma, but accepting such help from a stranger felt like crossing a boundary she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "That's very generous of him," Sophie finally said. "But I couldn't possibly." "Mr. Reed said you might say that," Margaret interrupted gently. "He also said to tell you that accepting help when it's offered isn't weakness, it's wisdom." The words struck Sophie deeply. How many times in the past months had her pride prevented her from reaching out, from accepting the few genuine offers of assistance that had come her way? "There's also a change of clothes for you," Margaret continued, gesturing to a neatly folded stack she now placed on a nearby chair. "Mr. Reed's sister is about your size. She keeps some things here for when she visits." Sophie glanced at the clothes, a simple pair of jeans, a soft green sweater, and undergarments still with store tags attached. Clean clothes that weren't donations from the shelters. Often picked over supply were a luxury she hadn't experienced in weeks. "Thank you," she said sincerely, some of her resistance melting away. "I'll get Emma ready and be down soon." Margaret nodded, pleased. "The dining room is down the main staircase, first door on your right. Take your time." After the housekeeper departed, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, thoughts swirling. Part of her, the part that had been burned too many times, screamed that this was too good to be true, that Nathan Reed must want something from her. But another part, perhaps the part that still believed in human kindness despite everything, whispered that sometimes help came from unexpected places. Emma stirred and began to make the small whimpering sounds that preceded waking. Sophie gathered her daughter into her arms, breathing in her sweet baby scent. "What do you think, Em? Should we have breakfast with the mysterious CEO who rescued us from the bus?" she whispered, gently stroking Emma's soft cheek. "I think we should. At the very least, we owe him a proper thank you before we go." 45 minutes later, freshly showered and dressed in the borrowed clothes that fit surprisingly well, Sophie carried Emma down the sweeping staircase of Nathan Reed's home. In daylight, the house was even more impressive, a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel, perched on what must be one of Portland's most exclusive hillsides, offering panoramic views of the city and the distant mountains. Following Margaret's directions, Sophie found the dining room, where Nathan sat at a large table, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face as he set the device aside. "Good morning," he greeted her, standing. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Sophie admitted honestly. "Thank you for that, and for—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything from the clothes she wore to the temporary sanctuary he had provided. Nathan waved away her thanks. "Please join me. Margaret makes exceptional pancakes." As if on cue, the housekeeper appeared, with a tray laden with breakfast foods, fluffy pancakes, fresh fruit, bacon, and a carafe of what smelled like freshly brewed coffee. Sophie's stomach rumbled audibly, and she blushed. "Someone's hungry," Margaret said with a smile, setting a plate in front of Sophie. "And what about this little angel? Has she had her breakfast yet?" "I fed her upstairs," Sophie replied, settling Emma more comfortably in her lap. The baby was alert and curious, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "I have a high chair we keep for my sister's little ones when they visit," Nathan offered. "Would that be helpful?" Sophie nodded gratefully, and soon Emma was settled in a high chair beside her, contentedly gumming a soft teething toy that Margaret had produced from somewhere. As Sophie ate, savoring the simple but delicious food, she studied Nathan surreptitiously. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and stress, the slight gray at his temples that contrasted with his otherwise dark hair, the expensive but understated watch on his wrist. He wore casual clothes today, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that somehow still managed to look tailored. "I imagine you have questions," Nathan said finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Sophie set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. "A few thousand, yes." Nathan's laugh was genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Fair enough. Where would you like to start?" "You said last night that you were once in my position," Sophie began, deciding to dive straight to the heart of the matter. "What did you mean by that?" Nathan's expression grew more solemn. He took a sip of his coffee, seeming to gather his thoughts. 15 years ago, I was homeless on these same streets," he said finally, his voice steady but quieter than before. "I'd lost my job, my apartment, and pretty much everything else due to a combination of bad luck and worse decisions. I was sleeping in shelters when I could get in, under bridges when I couldn't." Sophie listened, surprised by his candor. Nothing in his polished appearance or confident demeanor suggested such a past. "One night, during a particularly bad storm, I took shelter in the lobby of an office building. The security guard should have thrown me out, but instead, he brought me a cup of coffee and asked about my story." Nathan's eyes grew distant with memory. "His name was Joe, and he changed my life that night. He listened without judgment, then offered me his couch until I could get back on my feet. Just like that. He invited a homeless stranger to stay with him." Sophie couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Just like that," Nathan confirmed with a slight smile. "Though he did make me shower first. Said his wife would kill him if he brought home a guest who smelled like I did." Despite herself, Sophie laughed. Joe was a former Marine with a heart bigger than his common sense, according to his wife, Nathan continued. "He believed in second chances because he'd needed a few himself. That couch turned into a spare room for 3 months while I got a job at the same security company, saved up for an apartment, and started rebuilding." "And now you're a CEO," Sophie said, still trying to reconcile the successful man before her with the story he was telling. "That came much later," Nathan acknowledged. "The path from Joe's couch to this house wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, false starts, more mistakes. But having that initial safety net, that breathing room to think beyond day to day, survival, that made all the difference." Emma gurgled happily from her high chair, drawing both their attentions. Nathan smiled at the baby, then looked back at Sophie, his expression turning more serious. "When I saw you on that bus last night, exhausted but still fighting to take care of your daughter, I recognized that same determination I had once. And when you fell asleep and mentioned the shelter, I thought about what Joe did for me." He shrugged slightly. "I'm in a position to help now. It felt like the right thing to do." Sophie absorbed his words, trying to reconcile them with her deeply ingrained suspicion. Life had taught her that nothing came without strings attached, especially not kindness from strangers. "Why didn't you just wake me up at my stop?" she asked, the question that had been bothering her since she'd awoken in his home. Nathan looked slightly embarrassed. "I tried. You were so deeply asleep you barely stirred, and when I managed to rouse you slightly, you mumbled something about being tired and holding on tighter to Emma. The bus driver was getting impatient. And I made a split-second decision." He ran a hand through his hair. "In retrospect, I realize how alarming it must have been to wake up in a strange place. I apologize for that." His apology seemed sincere, his explanation plausible. Sophie had been exhausted enough that she could easily believe she'd been difficult to wake. "So what happens now?" she asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since she awoke. "That depends on you," Nathan replied. "At minimum, my driver can take you wherever you need to go today. But if you're open to it, I'd like to offer something more substantial. Sophie tensed slightly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Reed Innovations has a foundation that helps people facing temporary hardship, Nathan continued, apparently not noticing her reaction. We provide transitional housing, job placement assistance, child care support, all the things that make it possible for someone to get back on their feet. A charity case, Sophie said flatly, her pride stinging despite her desperate circumstances. No, Nathan countered firmly, an investment in potential. The foundation isn't charity, it's practical support with the expectation that recipients will eventually become self-sufficient. Many of our former program participants now work for Reed Innovations or serve on the foundation's board. Sophie looked down at Emma, who was happily babbling to herself, oblivious to the weighty conversation happening around her. What right did Sophie have to let pride stand in the way of giving her daughter a better life? I had a life before, she said softly. A good job as a paralegal. I was taking online courses for my law degree. I had plans and goals and savings. Her voice hardened. Then I met Ryan, who seemed perfect until he emptied our account to pay gambling debts and disappeared 3 weeks after Emma was born. Nathan's expression remained neutral, free of the judgment or pity Sophie had come to expect when she shared her story. The foundation could help you get back to that path, he said simply. Temporary housing in one of our apartments, childcare assistance so you can work, connections to legal firms in the city who might hire you, not a handout or reset. The offer was almost too perfect, addressing each of her most pressing concerns. But years of disappointment had taught Sophie to look for the trap, the hidden cost. Why would you do this for me, specifically? She asked bluntly. There are hundreds of women in my situation in Portland alone. Do you make this offer to everyone you meet on the night bus? Instead of being offended by her question, Nathan seemed to appreciate her directness. No, I don't. And if I'm being completely honest, there's something about your situation that resonated with me personally. My sister was in a similar position. About 5 years ago, different circumstances but the same result. Alone with a baby, struggling to stay afloat. What happened to her? Sophie asked, her curiosity piqued. She moved in with me for a while, got back on her feet. Now she's doing great running the HR department at Reed Innovations, raising my nephew, recently bought her own home. A flash of pride crossed his features. But she had family to fall back on. Not everyone does. Sophie thought about her own situation, no family, friends who had slowly drifted away during her relationship with Ryan, colleagues who probably assumed she'd simply chosen to be a stay-at-home mom after Emma was born. The isolation of her circumstances wasn't just emotional. It was practical, cutting her off from the support networks most people relied on in hard times. I would need to know more about this foundation program, she said finally, not quite. Accepting, but not refusing either. The details, the expectations, the timeline. Nathan's face brightened. Of course. Our program director, Alina, could meet with you today if you'd like. She can explain everything far better than I can. She's been running the foundation for the past decade. Before Sophie could respond, Nathan's phone chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. I apologize, but I need to take care of something for work. Would you mind if we pause this conversation? You're welcome to stay here as long as you'd like today. Margaret will take care of anything you need. We should probably get going, Sophie said automatically, the thought of imposing further making her uncomfortable. The shelter will be open now, and I've already taken advantage of your hospitality enough. Nathan shook his head firmly. Please, at least stay until you've spoken with Elena. She can be here in about an hour. In the meantime, there's a sunroom just through those doors that Emma might enjoy lots of natural light and plants. My nieces and nephews love it. The thought of returning to the shelter's noise and constraints was suddenly unbearable compared to the peace and comfort of Nathan's home. One more hour couldn't hurt. All right, Sophie conceded. We'll stay to meet with Elena. Nathan smiled, looking genuinely pleased. Excellent. I'll let her know. After he excused himself to take his call, Margaret appeared to clear the breakfast dishes. The sunroom is lovely this time of day, she commented. And if you don't mind my saying so, it's nice to see this house being used by a family again. It gets too quiet with just Mr. Reed rattling around in it. Sophie was surprised by the comment. He lives here alone? It seems like a lot of house for one person. Margaret's expression softened with what looked like affection tinged with concern. He bought it thinking someday he'd fill it with family. Things don't always work out as planned though, do they? She bustled about, efficiently stacking plates. But he's a good man. The best I've worked for in 30 years of housekeeping. The simple endorsement carried weight coming from someone who had clearly known Nathan for years. Sophie found herself wanting to believe in the genuine nature of his offer, despite her ingrained skepticism. The sunroom proved to be as lovely. As promised, a glass-enclosed space filled with thriving plants of all sizes, comfortable wicker furniture with plush cushions, and a soft rug where Sophie could safely place Emma to stretch and explore. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the space despite the cool autumn day outside. As Emma happily kicked and cooed on the rug, Sophie found herself drawn to a wall of photographs she hadn't initially noticed. They appeared to tell the story of Reed Innovations and its founder. There was Nathan receiving some kind of award. Nathan at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for what appeared to be a new building. Nathan surrounded by employees at a company picnic. What caught Sophie's attention, though, were the less formal photos interspersed among the professional ones. Nathan with an older couple who must be his parents. Nathan with a woman who shared his eyes and smile, his sister presumably, Nathan. Holding a toddler on his shoulders. One photo in particular made her pause. It showed a much younger Nathan standing proudly in front of a small office, with an older man whose weathered face beamed with pride, his arm thrown around Nathan's shoulders. They were holding a sign that read, "Reed Security Solutions Grand." Opening. "That's Joe," came Nathan's voice from the doorway, startling Sophie. "The security guard who took me in. He became my business partner when I started my first company." Sophie turned, embarrassed to be caught snooping. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "Not at all," Nathan assured her, crossing the room to stand beside her. "These are here to be seen. They remind me of where I came from and the people who helped me along the way." He pointed to the photo Sophie had been studying. "Joe invested his life savings, $15,000, in that first business with me. Everyone thought he was crazy to trust a former homeless guy with his retirement fund." A fond smile played across his face. He said it was the best investment he ever made. When Reed Security was acquired 5 years later, his share was worth nearly $2 million. "What happened to him?" Sophie asked, captivated by the story. "He and his wife retired to Florida. They have a place right on the beach. He sends me pictures of his fishing trophies every other week." Nathan's expression was warm with genuine affection. "We still have dinner whenever I'm in Tampa." The photo beside it showed Nathan with an attractive woman with blonde hair, both of them smiling broadly at the camera, a tropical beach visible behind them. "Is that your wife?" Sophie asked before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed Nathan's face briefly. "Confiancy, Claudia. That was taken in the Maldives about 3 years ago. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." Nathan shook his head dismissively. "Ancient history. Claudia decided that my work schedule and my background weren't compatible with the future she'd envisioned. She's married to a surgeon now, living in Boston." The bitterness in his tone was slight but unmistakable, suggesting the wound might not be as healed as he claimed. Before Sophie could respond, Emma let out a delighted squeal from her spot on the rug, breaking the moment. Nathan's expression immediately brightened as he looked at the baby. "She seems happy." "She is." She's remarkably good-natured considering everything she's been through. Children are resilient, more so than we give them credit for. Emma chose that moment to roll onto her stomach and push herself up on her arms, looking quite pleased with her accomplishment. Nathan applauded softly, earning a gummy smile from the baby. She likes you. The feeling is mutual. She reminds me of my nephew when he was this age, always curious, taking everything in. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Emma explore her surroundings, occasionally reaching for a shaft of sunlight as if trying to grasp it in her tiny fingers. Elena should be here soon. She's bringing information about all our programs. There's no pressure to decide anything today, by the way. We can arrange temporary accommodations for you and Emma while you consider your options. The offer was tempting, so tempting that it frightened Sophie how much she wanted to accept it. It seems too good to be true. I understand the skepticism. In your position, I'd feel the same way. All I can say is that helping others isn't just philanthropy for me, it's personal. I know what it's like to be one stroke of bad luck away from disaster. I know how hard it is to climb back up when you've hit bottom. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. The foundation isn't charity, Sophie, it's a ladder. All we do is hold it steady while you climb. The metaphor resonated with Sophie in a way that broke through some of her resistance. She wasn't looking for a handout, she wanted a chance to rebuild, to provide for Emma through her own efforts, to reclaim the independence and dignity she'd lost. Before she could respond, Margaret appeared at the door. Ms. Elena is here, Mr. Reed. Excellent. Show her in, please. As Margaret left to fetch their visitor, Nathan turned back to Sophie with a reassuring smile. Just listen to what she has to say, that's all I ask. Sophie nodded, gathering Emma into her arms as they waited for the woman who might hold the key to their future. Whatever happened next, she realized, would depend on her willingness to take a risk, to trust that sometimes help could come without hidden costs, and that a chance encounter on a rainy night might indeed be the turning point she'd been praying for. Elena Montgomery was nothing like Sophie had expected. Instead of the polished, intimidating corporate executive she had imagined, the woman who entered the sunroom was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a practical bun, laugh lines etched deeply around her eyes, and a warm smile that immediately put Sophie at ease. She wore simple slacks and a colorful cardigan that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. You must be Sophie. And this beautiful little one must be Emma. Sophie shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses. That suggested Elena was no stranger to physical work, despite her executive position. Yes, it's nice to meet you. Nathan made the formal introductions, then excused himself. I have a conference call I can't reschedule, but you're in excellent hands with Elena. She knows more about the foundation than I do. After he left, Elena settled into the chair Nathan had vacated, setting a leather portfolio on the small table beside her. Nathan tells me you've had a rough time recently. That's one way to put it. Elena smiled understandingly. Let me take her for a minute, so you can focus. Before Sophie could protest, Elena had scooped Emma up with the practiced ease of someone who had handled many babies. My goodness, you're a sturdy little thing, aren't you? To Sophie's surprise, Emma didn't fuss at being handed to a stranger. Instead, she seemed fascinated by Elena's dangling earrings, reaching for them with determined little fingers. I raised 4 of my own and have 7 grandchildren. Babies tend to sense when someone's comfortable holding them. There was something about Elena that invited confidence. Perhaps it was her straightforward manner or the absence of judgment in her eyes. Whatever the reason, Sophie found herself sharing her story more openly than she had intended. Her job as a paralegal, her relationship with Ryan, his gambling addiction and subsequent abandonment, her struggles to keep herself and Emma afloat without family support. Elena listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing Sophie to speak uninterrupted. When Sophie finished, Elena nodded thoughtfully. Your situation is unfortunately common more so than most people realize. The path from stability to crisis is often much shorter than people imagine, especially for single parents. Nathan mentioned that the foundation might be able to help. We can do more than help. We can provide the foundation for you to rebuild your life. But first, I need to be very clear about something. Our program isn't a handout. It's rigorous, and we expect full commitment from participants. Rather than being discouraging, Elena's directness was refreshing. I don't want charity. I want to work to support myself and Emma. I just need a fighting chance. That's exactly what we offer. She handed Emma back to Sophie and opened her portfolio, removing several brochures and what looked like an application form. The New Beginnings program has several components. First is housing. We have a complex of furnished apartments specifically for program participants. They're modest but comfortable, with on-site childcare facilities. Sophie leafed through the brochure, which showed images of a modern apartment building with a playground and garden areas. The apartments looked clean and bright, nothing luxurious, but far better than the shelter. Second is employment. We work with participants to either find jobs that match their skills or provide training for new career paths. In your case, with your paralegal background, we already have several possibilities. Really? Sophie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. She hadn't dared to hope she might return to her field so quickly. Elena nodded firmly. 3 of our partner law firms currently have openings for paralegals, and one specifically mentioned needing someone with experience in family law, which Nathan mentioned was your specialty. It was true Sophie had worked primarily on family law cases in her previous position, finding the work challenging but deeply rewarding. The thought of returning to that world sent a surge of hope through her that was almost painful in its intensity. The program lasts 12 months. During that time, participants pay a percentage of their income as rent. It starts low and increases gradually as your financial situation stabilizes. We provide childcare, counseling services, financial literacy classes, and a matched savings program to help you build an emergency fund. And after the 12 months? After graduation, most participants transition to independent housing, though we maintain support services for an additional year to ensure stability. Elena's expression grew more serious. I won't pretend it's easy. The program demands commitment, responsibility, and hard work. But for those willing to put in the effort, the success rate is over 85%. The statistics were impressive, but Sophie still had questions. What's the catch? There's always a catch. Rather than being offended, Elena laughed a genuine, warm sound. You're right to be skeptical. The catch, if you want to call it that, is that we expect full participation in all program components. That means attending financial classes even when you're tired, meeting regularly with your case manager, following through on job responsibilities, and adhering to program rules. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. The other catch is that we expect our graduates to give back in some way, not financially, but by mentoring new participants, speaking at fundraisers, or volunteering. We're building a community as much as a program. As if sensing the importance of the conversation, Emma had grown surprisingly quiet in Sophie's arms, her eyes growing heavy as she fought sleep. Here's this script cleaned up for CapCut TT. It sounds almost too perfect. How does someone qualify? There must be a waiting list. There usually is. But we recently expanded the program thanks to a new funding grant, so we have immediate openings. As for qualification, the process includes an application, interview, background check, and commitment to program rules, including a strict zero-tolerance policy for illegal activities. She handed Sophie the application form. We try to balance need with potential for success. Our goal is to help people who are experiencing temporary hardship, but who have the drive and ability to become self-sufficient with the right support. Sophie stared at the application, her mind racing with possibilities. After months of just trying to survive day to day, the thought of having a stable home, returning to work in her field, providing properly for Emma, it was overwhelming. I don't understand why Nathan is doing this. Why me, specifically? He mentioned his sister was in a similar situation, but still. Elena's expression softened. Nathan doesn't usually tell his story to strangers, so the fact that he shared it with you means something. When he found Reed Innovations 15 years ago, he made a promise to himself that he would create opportunities for others, the way Joe created one for him. She gestured around at the sunroom, at the luxurious house beyond. All of this, the company, the foundation, this house, it came from a chance encounter and one person's decision to help. Nathan never forgot that. He believes in the ripple effect of kindness. But there are so many people who need help. How does he choose? He doesn't, usually. The foundation has a selection committee that reviews applications. But occasionally, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, Nathan meets someone whose situation resonates with him personally, and he advocates for them specifically. She smiled gently. You're one of those people, Sophie. Emma had finally lost her battle. With sleep, her tiny body going limp in Sophie's arms, her rosebud mouth slightly open as she breathed deeply. Looking down at her daughter's peaceful face, Sophie felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her, not just to provide for Emma's physical needs, but to give her a stable, secure childhood, opportunities for growth, a mother she could be proud of. I need to think about this. It's a lot to process, of course. Take the application with you, look it over. Call me with any questions. My direct number is on the card attached. She began gathering her things, then paused, regarding Sophie thoughtfully. May I offer some advice from someone who's been where you are? Sophie nodded, curious. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. I know because I've been there. 25 years ago, I was a single mother of 2 living in my car after leaving an abusive marriage. I was too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit I couldn't do it alone. Sophie hadn't expected this revelation from the poised, successful woman before her. What changed? My 6-year-old got sick, really sick, and I couldn't even afford medicine. That was my wake-up call. I realized my pride wasn't serving my children, it was hurting them. She reached over and lightly touched Sophie's hand. The strongest thing I ever did was admit I needed help. The second strongest was accepting it when it was offered. Everything good in my life, now my career, my healthy children, my grandchildren stemmed from that decision. The words resonated deeply with Sophie, breaking through layers of resistance she'd built up over months of disappointment and betrayal. How did you end up working for the foundation? Elena smiled. I was one of its first success stories. Back when it was just a small project, Nathan ran out of his first company's office. After I got back on my feet, I volunteered, then joined the staff part-time, worked my way up to program director, and eventually executive director. I've been with the foundation for 18 years now. She stood, gathering her portfolio. The New Beginnings program exists because Nathan and I both believe that most people don't want handouts, they want opportunities. They want the dignity of solving their own problems with the right support. That's what we offer, Sophie. Not a rescue, but a partnership. After Elena left, promising to check in the following day, Sophie remained in the sunroom, watching Emma sleep while turning over everything she'd learned. The foundation program sounded like exactly what she needed, a chance to rebuild with dignity, to work toward independence rather than merely surviving day to day. Yet something still held her back, some lingering doubt she couldn't quite articulate. Was it fear of disappointment, of having hope only to have it crushed again? Or perhaps deeper than that, a fear of success, of what it might mean to accept this new path? You look deep in thought. Sophie looked up to find him leaning against the doorframe, his earlier formal business attire replaced with a more casual sweater and jeans that somehow made him seem more approachable, just trying to process everything. Elena explained the program. It sounds incredible. Nathan entered the room, taking a seat across from her. But you're still hesitant. Sophie nodded, appreciating his perception. It feels like accepting would mean admitting defeat somehow. Like I failed. I understand that feeling. When Joe offered me his couch, my first instinct was to refuse. Not because I had anywhere better to go, I didn't. But because accepting meant acknowledging how far I'd fallen, how badly I needed help. What changed your mind? Joe said something I never forgot. He said, son, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else be strong for you until you remember your own strength. Nathan's expression was thoughtful, his eyes focused on some distant memory. It turned out he was right. The words struck Sophie powerfully. How long had she been carrying the weight of survival alone, refusing help out of a misplaced sense of pride or independence? How much energy had she expended just trying to make it through each day, energy that could have been directed toward building a better future? I'd like to show you something, if you're willing. It might help you decide. Curious despite her reservations, Sophie nodded. Emma's pretty deeply asleep. She should be fine if we're not gone long. We won't leave the house. Margaret can keep an eye on her, and we'll bring the baby monitor. He produced a small device from his pocket, setting it on the table beside Emma's makeshift bed of cushions. Modern technology will hear her if she so much as sighs. After ensuring Emma was comfortable and Margaret was aware of their location, Sophie followed Nathan through the house, noting details she'd missed in her earlier fatigue, the tasteful artwork, the photographs that suggested a life rich with connections despite Nathan's current solitary living situation. The subtle signs of a home designed for family gatherings rather than just one person. Nathan led her to a room at the back of the house that turned out to be a home office, its large windows overlooking a terraced garden that cascaded down the hillside. One wall was dominated by bookshelves, another by a large desk with multiple monitors. But it was the third wall that drew Sophie's attention. It was covered with framed photographs, certificates, and what appeared to be thank you notes. This is what I wanted to show you. These are the faces of the New Beginnings program. Sophie moved closer, studying the photographs. They showed people of various ages and backgrounds, young mothers with children, middle-aged men in work uniforms, elderly couples, teenagers in graduation caps and gowns. Each photo was accompanied by a small plaque with a name and date. Every person on this wall came through the Foundation's programs. Some were homeless, some were escaping abuse. Some had medical crises that drained their savings. Some were veterans struggling with PTSD. All of them needed a temporary hand up. Pointed to a photo of a woman in her 30s standing proudly in front of a small house. A teenage boy beside her. Maria Garcia, she was living in her car with her son after fleeing domestic violence. Came through the program 5 years ago. Now she owns that house and manages our child care center. His finger moved to another image, a middle-aged man in a mechanic's uniform standing beside a gleaming motorcycle. James Wilson, former Army sergeant. Lost his leg in Afghanistan, lost his marriage to PTSD, was living in shelters when we met him. Now he runs his own motorcycle repair shop and mentors other veterans. Sophie moved along the wall, taking in the stories captured in each frame. There were dozens of them, each representing a life transformed. The magnitude of what Nathan and his foundation had accomplished was humbling. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand that you wouldn't be the first person to stand where you're standing now, unsure, scared, wondering if accepting help means giving up. Nathan's expression was earnest, his eyes meeting hers directly. Every person on this wall had that same moment of decision. And not one of them regrets the choice they made. He stepped closer, his voice low and intense. This isn't about charity, Sophie. It's about investment, in potential, in futures, in dreams that got derailed, but aren't destroyed. We don't give handouts, we give opportunities. What people do with those opportunities is up to them. Sophie thought about her own derailed dreams, the law degree she'd been working toward, the career she'd been building, the stable home she'd wanted to provide for Emma. She thought about how quickly it had all unraveled, how powerless she'd felt to stop the downward spiral once it began. "I want to be on this wall someday," she said quietly, the decision crystallizing within her even as she spoke the words. "I want to look back at this moment as the turning point, not the lowest point." Nathan's smile was genuine, lighting his entire face. That's exactly the attitude that makes the program work. It's not about where you are, now it's about where you're determined to go. The sound of Emma's cries through the baby monitor interrupted the moment. Sophie instinctively moved toward the door, maternal instincts overriding all other considerations. "She's probably hungry," she explained as they hurried back toward the sunroom. "She usually naps longer, but with all the changes in routine." "Of course," Nathan said, keeping pace with her through the hallways. "Parenthood waits for no one, does it?" They found Emma awake and fussing, her little face scrunched in displeasure at finding herself in unfamiliar surroundings upon waking. Sophie scooped her up, murmuring soothing words as she settled into a chair to feed her. "I should give you privacy," Nathan said, turning to leave. "Wait," Sophie called after him. "I've made my decision. I want to apply for the program." Nathan paused, turning back with a carefully measured expression. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," Sophie replied with more confidence than she'd felt in months. "Not for me, for Emma. She deserves a mother who can provide for her, who has a career and a future to offer. The program sounds like exactly what we need to get back on track." The relief in Nathan's smile was palpable. "I'm glad to hear it. I'll let Elena know right away. She can fast-track your application." As he turned to leave again, Sophie was struck by a sudden thought. "Nathan, why were you really on that bus last night? You never actually explained." Nathan paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "The truth? It was the anniversary of when Joe found me in that lobby 15 years ago. Every year on that date, I ride the public bus through the city as a reminder of where I came from and how far I've traveled." His expression grew more solemn. "It keeps me grounded, helps me remember that the distance between success and struggle isn't as great as people think." The simple honesty of his answer touched Sophie deeply. It spoke to a character shaped by hardship, but not hardened by it. A man who had achieved success without forgetting the path that led him there. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Nathan nodded, understanding the depth of gratitude behind her simple words. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start the application process and find you and Emma a place in one of our apartments. The first step of many." As he left, Sophie looked down at Emma, who was nursing contentedly, one tiny hand resting against Sophie's chest. "What do you think, Em? Ready for a new beginning?" The baby's eyes, so like her own, gazed back with complete trust, as if to say that home wasn't a place but a feeling of safety, and that she'd found it in her mother's arms. For the first time in months, Sophie allowed herself to truly hope, not the desperate, clinging hope that had sustained her through the worst days, but a stronger, more resilient hope built on the foundation of real opportunity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now there was a road, not just the day-to-day struggle for survival that had consumed her life since Ryan's departure. As Emma finished nursing and drifted back to sleep, Sophie found herself thinking about the wall of success stories in Nathan's office. Someday, perhaps, her photo would join those others, a testament not just to the foundation's work, but to her own resilience, her refusal to let one man's betrayal define her future or her daughter's. The thought brought with it a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, interviews, planning, the first steps toward rebuilding. But today, in this moment of decision, Sophie had already taken the most important step of all, choosing to accept help not as a defeat, but as the beginning of victory. 6 months later, Sophie stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her apartment at the New Beginnings complex, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Gone were the dark circles and hollow cheeks, replaced by healthy color and clear eyes that reflected not just physical recovery, but a renewed spirit. Her auburn hair, now professionally trimmed, fell in soft waves around her face, and the simple navy blue dress she wore purchased with her own money from her first full paycheck fit her recovered figure perfectly. "Mama, Mama!" Emma's voice called from the living room, where the 9-month-old was practicing her newest skill, pulling herself up to stand while holding onto furniture. At this rate, she'd be walking before her first birthday. "Coming, sweet girl," Sophie called back, giving herself one final appraisal in the mirror before heading out to scoop up her daughter. Emma had thrived these past 6 months. The consistency of routine, the excellent care at the Foundation's Child Care Center, and Sophie's own growing confidence had all contributed to raising a happy, secure baby who greeted each day with infectious enthusiasm. Her previously sparse baby hair had grown into adorable auburn curls that matched Sophie's, and her babbling had expanded to include several recognizable words, Mama being her favorite. Today was a milestone Sophie had been both anticipating and dreading, her 6-month program review with Elena and the Foundation team. Though she knew objectively that she was making excellent progress, the meeting would determine whether she continued with the program as planned or needed adjustments to her personalized development track. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Layla, Sophie's neighbor and fellow program participant, who had agreed to watch Emma during the meeting. "Look at you," Layla exclaimed when Sophie opened the door, giving an appreciative whistle. "Someone's dressing for success today." Sophie laughed, grateful for Layla's easy friendship. A former teacher who had lost everything in a house fire, Layla had become one of Sophie's closest allies in the program, the two women often trading childcare and moral support. "Too much?" Sophie asked, suddenly second-guessing her outfit. "Choice, not at all," Layla assured her, already crossing to where Emma was practicing her standing. "You look like the professional paralegal you are. They're going to be so impressed with your progress." Sophie hoped so. The past 6 months had been transformative but challenging. After her application had been expedited, she and Emma had moved into their 1-bedroom apartment at the New Beginnings complex just 3 days after that fateful bus ride. The apartment was modest but comfortable, with new furniture, a fully equipped kitchen, and even a small balcony overlooking the community garden. More importantly, within 2 weeks, Sophie had been interviewed and hired by Westbrook and Associates, a family law firm that partnered with the Foundation. She'd started part-time, allowing her to ease back into professional work while attending the program's required financial literacy classes and counseling sessions. 3 months in, impressed with her performance, the firm had offered her full-time hours with benefits, a crucial step toward complete independence. "You're going to ace this review," Layla said confidently, tickling Emma's tummy and earning a delighted giggle. "Now go, you don't want to be late. Emma and I have big plans involving mashed bananas and some very educational puppet videos." With a grateful smile and a quick kiss to Emma's forehead, Sophie grabbed her portfolio and headed out, walking the short distance to the Foundation's main building. The New Beginnings complex was thoughtfully designed, with the residential apartments, child care center, education building, and administrative offices all situated around a central courtyard, creating a small community that provided both support and independence for participants. The morning air was crisp with early spring freshness, flowers beginning to bloom in the carefully tended garden beds. Sophie took a deep breath, calming the butterflies in her stomach. This review was important, but she was prepared. The portfolio under her arm contained detailed documentation of her progress, financial records showing her growing savings account, performance reviews from her employer, certificates from completed program courses, and her updated 5-year plan. At the administration building, Sophie was shown directly to the conference room where Elena was waiting along with 2 other foundation staff members, Marcus, the employment coordinator who had helped place her at Westbrook and Associates, and Danny, her personal financial counselor. Sophie. Elena greeted her warmly. Right on time as always. You look wonderful. Thank you, Sophie replied, settling into the chair at the table. I'm a little nervous, I'll admit. No need for nerves, Elena assured her, opening a folder that contained Sophie's file. This is just a check-in to assess your progress and make any necessary adjustments to your program path. From my perspective, you've been exemplary. Over the next hour, they reviewed every aspect of Sophie's participation in the program, her employment situation, her growing savings account, her participation in required classes, her adherence to the program's budgeting guidelines, and her long-term plans for independent housing. I'm particularly impressed with your savings rate, Donnie noted, pointing to a chart in the financial report. You've consistently saved above the required minimum, even with childcare expenses. Sophie had made saving a priority, remembering all too well the panic of having no financial cushion when Ryan had cleaned out their account. The budgeting classes really helped, she acknowledged. And living here with subsidized rent makes it possible. Marcus nodded approvingly. And Westbrook and Associates has nothing but praise for your work, Mr. Westbrook. Specifically mentioned your organization and attention to detail in complex cases. The positive feedback was gratifying, validation of how hard Sophie had worked to rebuild her professional reputation. I've been fortunate, she said modestly. They've been incredibly supportive of my situation. Fortunate, perhaps, Elena observed with a knowing smile, but also deserving. Not everyone would have bounced back from such setbacks with your determination. After reviewing all the documentation, the team members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that made Sophie's heart rate increase. Well, Elena said finally, closing the folder, based on everything we've discussed, we have a proposal for you. Sophie steeled herself, unsure what to expect. Typically, participants transition to independent housing after the full 12-month program, Elena continued. However, in cases of exceptional progress, we sometimes offer an accelerated track. We believe you're ready to begin that transition at the 9-month mark, just 3 months from now. The news was unexpected. Sophie had been working hard, yes, but she hadn't anticipated accelerated advancement through the program. Really? You think I'm ready? More than ready, Marcus confirmed. Your employment is stable with strong growth potential. Your savings are well above target, and you've completed all required program components with excellent evaluations. The accelerated track would include assistance finding affordable housing in your target neighborhood, Donnie explained, plus continued childcare subsidies for an additional 6 months to ease the financial transition. Sophie's mind raced, processing this new information. The prospect of complete independence, her own apartment, no program supervision, full autonomy was both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. This isn't us pushing you out early, Elena clarified, seeming to read Sophie's expression. It's recognition that you're progressing faster than the standard timeline. If you prefer to complete the full 12 months here, that's entirely your choice. I need to think about it, Sophie said honestly. It's wonderful news. But a big step. Of course, Elena agreed. Take a week to consider the options. We'll provide detailed information about both paths for you to review. As the meeting concluded with congratulations on her progress, Sophie felt a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and apprehension. The foundation's confidence in her was validating, but the prospect of leaving the safety net of the program sooner than expected was daunting. Lost in thought as she exited the building, Sophie nearly collided with someone entering, someone whose familiar voice immediately pulled her from her reverie. "Sophie, just the person I was hoping to see." She looked up to find Nathan Reed, smiling at her, dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, looking relaxed in a way she hadn't seen during their first encounters. "Nathan. I mean, Mr. Reed," she corrected herself, still uncertain about the appropriate level of formality with the Foundation's founder, despite having seen him regularly during program events over the past months. "Nathan is fine," he assured her with a warm smile. "How are you, and how's Emma?" "We're both doing well," Sophie replied, genuinely pleased to see him. Though Nathan maintained appropriate professional distance from program participants, he attended many Foundation events, and always made a point of checking in with Sophie and Emma when their paths crossed. "Emma's trying to walk already, furniture cruising and standing on her own." "That's wonderful," Nathan said, his enthusiasm genuine. "They grow so quickly at that age." "Actually, I was coming to find you. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Curious, Sophie nodded. "Of course. I just finished my 6-month review." "Perfect timing," Nathan said, gesturing toward a nearby bench in the courtyard. "Let's sit for a moment." Once seated, Nathan turned to face her, his expression more serious. "Elena mentioned that the team is recommending you for the accelerated track." "Yes, just now," Sophie confirmed, still processing the news herself. "It's a big decision." "It is," Nathan agreed. "And entirely your choice. But I wanted to speak with you personally about another opportunity that might factor into your decision." Intrigued, Sophie waited for him to continue. "Reed Innovations has created a new position in our legal department," Nathan explained. "An executive paralegal role, supporting our general counsel on corporate governance matters. When the position was approved, I immediately thought of you." Sophie's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? But I've been back in the workforce for just 6 months, and my experience is in family law, not corporate." "True," Nathan acknowledged, "but Westbrook speaks very highly of your capabilities, adaptability, and work ethic. Our general counsel, Marianne Chun, reviewed your resume and was impressed with your educational background and the complex cases you've handled." He paused, watching her reaction. "The position offers substantially higher compensation than your current role, comprehensive benefits including childcare subsidies, and a clearer path to advancement if you decide to complete your law degree." Sophie's mind raced, trying to process this unexpected development. I don't know what to say. It's an incredible opportunity." "There's no pressure to decide immediately," Nathan assured her. "Marianne would like to interview you formally next week, and of course, you should consider how this aligns with your long-term goals." "Why me?" Sophie asked suddenly, the question that had lingered since their first encounter resurfacing. "With all due respect, Nathan, there must be dozens of qualified paralegals in Portland with more experience in corporate law." Nathan considered her question thoughtfully before answering. "When I first started Reed Innovations, I made a promise to myself that I would build a company where talent and potential mattered more than pedigree or connections, where people would be judged on their character and capabilities, not their circumstances." He gestured around at the Foundation complex. "The same philosophy drives the New Beginnings program. We don't just help people survive temporary hardship, we invest in their future contributions." His gaze met hers directly. "You've demonstrated exceptional resilience, intelligence, and work ethic. Those qualities are far harder to find than specific legal experience." Marianne agrees she'd rather hire someone with your fundamental qualities and train them in corporate law than someone with the right resume but less personal drive. The sincerity in his explanation touched Sophie deeply. "Thank you for your confidence in me. I'd be honored to interview with Miss Chun." "Excellent," Nathan said, visibly pleased. "Her assistant will contact you to schedule a time." As he stood to leave, he added casually, "By the way, Reed Innovations is hosting a small gathering this weekend. Just a spring barbecue for employees and foundation participants. You and Emma should come. It would be a good opportunity to meet some of the team informally before your interview." "We'd like that," Sophie replied, finding that she genuinely meant it. After Nathan departed, Sophie remained on the bench for several minutes, overwhelmed by the possibilities suddenly unfolding before her. 6 months ago, she had been sleeping in a shelter, desperately trying to keep Emma fed and safe, with no clear path forward. Now she was being considered for an executive position at one of Portland's most prestigious companies, potentially moving into her own apartment months ahead of schedule. The contrast was so stark it almost seemed unreal, like a dream from which she might awaken at any moment. Yet the bench beneath her was solid, the spring breeze tangible against her skin, the sounds of children playing in the nearby daycare yard undeniably real. With a deep breath, Sophie stood and began walking back toward her apartment, her mind already organizing the research she would need to do before the interview with Marianne Chun. The nervous energy she felt wasn't fear, she realized, but excitement, the exhilarating sensation of possibilities opening before her instead of doors closing. When she arrived home, she found Emma and Layla engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation, though Emma's contributions consisted mainly of enthusiastic babbling and occasional shrieks of delight. "How did it go?" Layla asked, looking up from their play. "Better than I expected," Sophie replied, sitting cross-legged on the floor to join them. "They're recommending me for the accelerated track." "That's amazing," Layla exclaimed. "I knew they would. You've been crushing this program since day one." "There's more," Sophie added, still processing the news herself. "Nathan Reed just offered me an interview for an executive paralegal position at Reed Innovations." Layla's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" That's huge, Sophie. Reed Innovations is like the golden ticket of employers in Portland." "I know," Sophie agreed, gathering Emma into her lap as the baby crawled over, demanding attention. "It's all happening so fast. 6 months ago, I was at rock bottom, and now you're rising like a phoenix," Layla finished for her, squeezing her shoulder affectionately. "Because that's who you are. You never gave up, even when things were at their worst." Emma patted Sophie's cheeks with her tiny hands, babbling something that sounded remarkably like "Mama up." The simple gesture, the trust in her daughter's eyes, reminded Sophie of why she had fought so hard to rebuild their lives. "You know what this means, right?" Layla said with a grin. "Shopping trip. You need something killer for that interview." Sophie laughed, the remaining tension draining from her shoulders. "Is that your solution to everything?" "Only the good things," Layla replied with a wink. "Success deserves celebration and a new outfit." That weekend, Sophie found herself approaching Nathan's hillside home once again, this time under very different circumstances than her first visit. Emma was perched on her hip, dressed in an adorable sundress with a matching hat to protect her fair skin from the spring sunshine. Sophie herself wore a simple but flattering blue dress that Layla had insisted brought out her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. The gathering was being held in Nathan's expansive backyard, which had been transformed with tables, chairs, and a play area for children. About 50 people mingled on the terrace and lawn. Reed Innovations employees and their families, foundation staff, and other program participants whom Sophie recognized from community events. "Sophie, you made it," Elena called, approaching with a warm smile. "And look at Miss Emma, all dressed up for the party." Emma, who had become quite social during their months at the foundation, reached for Elena with a happy squeal. The older woman laughed, taking the baby with practiced ease. Go mingle, Elena encouraged Sophie. Emma and I will get acquainted with the other little ones in the play area. Nathan's niece and nephew are here. They'd love to meet her. Freed temporarily from parenting duties, Sophie made her way through the gathering, surprised by how many people greeted her by name. Some were foundation staff she'd worked with, others were fellow program participants, but several were Reed Innovations employees who seemed to already know who she was. "You must be Sophie," said a striking Asian woman in her early 50s, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Marianne Chun, General Counsel at Reed Innovations." "Miss Chun," Sophie replied, shaking her hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm looking forward to our interview next week." "As am I," Marianne said with an appraising smile. "Nathan speaks very highly of you, and your references from Westbrook and Associates are impressive. I hope you don't mind a little shop talk at a social event, but I'm curious what interests you about transitioning from family law to corporate governance." The direct question caught Sophie slightly off guard, but she appreciated Marianne's straightforward approach. "Honestly, I see more similarities than differences," she replied after a moment's consideration. "Both require meticulous attention to detail, clear communication of complex legal concepts to non-lawyers, and the ability to anticipate potential issues before they become problems." Marianne's eyebrows rose slightly, her expression approving. "An interesting perspective. Most candidates focus on the differences and try to convince me they've always secretly wanted to work in corporate law." Sophie smiled. "I've found honesty works better in the long run. Family law taught me valuable skills, and I'm excited about applying them in a new context while learning the specifics of corporate governance." "Refreshing," Marianne commented. "We should have an interesting conversation next week. For now, though, enjoy the party. I believe your daughter has made friends with my godson in the play area." As Marianne moved on to speak with other guests, Sophie felt a small surge of confidence. The brief exchange had gone well, and Marianne seemed genuinely interested rather than merely polite. Making her way toward the refreshment table, Sophie caught sight of Nathan across the lawn, deep in conversation with an older couple. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, smiled, and excused himself to join her. "I see you've met Marianne," he observed, handing her a glass of lemonade. "She doesn't usually attend these gatherings, came specifically to meet you informally before the interview." "No pressure," Sophie joked, though she was secretly pleased by the attention. Nathan laughed. "Marianne doesn't waste time on candidates. She's not seriously considering. The fact that she sought you out is a good sign." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children playing on the lawn. Emma was sitting with a slightly older boy who appeared to be showing her how to stack blocks, her expression one of intense concentration. "That's my nephew, Alex," Nathan noted, following her gaze. "He's 5 and very protective of younger children." Emma seems to have made a new friend. The sight of her daughter playing happily, secure and thriving, brought a lump to Sophie's throat. 6 months ago, she had wondered if Emma would ever have anything resembling a normal childhood. Now here she was, surrounded by other children, with opportunities opening before her that Sophie had feared might be forever closed. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Nathan observed, his tone gentle. "Just reflecting on how much has changed," Sophie admitted. 6 months ago, I fell asleep on your shoulder on a city bus, too exhausted to even make it back to a homeless shelter. Today I'm standing in your backyard, interviewing for an executive position, watching my daughter play without worry. It doesn't seem real sometimes. The distance between crisis and stability is shorter than most people realize in both directions." Nathan replied thoughtfully. "That's what makes the Foundation's work so important. Most of our participants aren't fundamentally different from our employees. They've just experienced a series of setbacks without the resources to recover." He gestured toward the diverse gathering. "That's why I host these events, to break down the artificial barriers between helper and helped. The truth is, we're all just people navigating life's challenges with whatever tools we have available. The wisdom in his words resonated deeply with Sophie. I've been thinking a lot about what you said when we first met about Joe giving you a chance when you needed it most. I'm beginning to understand why that moment shaped you so profoundly. Nathan nodded, his expression softening with memory. The most powerful thing Joe did wasn't offering me a place to stay. It was believing I could be more than my circumstances. That belief sustained me through years of hard work and setbacks. He turned to look at her directly, his gaze earnest. The foundation provides practical support, but what really transforms lives is the restoration of hope and dignity. Seeing yourself as someone with a future again, not just a present crisis to survive. I want to pay it forward someday, Sophie said, the words emerging with sudden certainty. When Emma and I are stable, when we're truly on our feet, I want to help others the way the foundation has helped us. I have no doubt you will, Nathan replied with a warm smile. In fact, I'm counting on it. The true success of the program isn't measured in statistics or graduation rates. It's in the ripple effect of lives transformed, who then transform others. As the afternoon progressed, Sophie found herself fully engaged in the gathering, conversing easily with Nathan's employees and fellow foundation participants alike. The artificial distinctions between them seemed to dissolve in the warm spring sunshine, revealing the shared humanity beneath different circumstances. When it was time to leave, Sophie gathered a sleepy Emma, who had played herself to exhaustion. As Nathan walked them to their car, Sophie had recently purchased a modest used vehicle with her savings and a partial grant from the Foundation's transportation assistance program. He seemed hesitant, as if wanting to say something more. "I've been meaning to ask," he finally said as she secured Emma in her car seat. "Have you made a decision about the accelerated track? Elena mentioned you were still considering your options." Sophie straightened, closing the car door gently. To avoid waking Emma. "I have actually. I'm going to accept it. Between the potential position at Reed Innovations and my savings progress, I think I'm ready for the next step." The smile that spread across Nathan's face was one of genuine pleasure. "I'm glad to hear it. Not that I'm surprised you've exceeded everyone's expectations from day one. I never doubted it," Nathan said with genuine pride. "Your work on the legal framework for our Asian expansion has been exceptional. The board specifically mentioned it in our last meeting." Sophie felt a flush of pleasure at the praise. While she knew her rapid advancement at Reed Innovations was due to her own hard work and capabilities, having her contributions recognized still meant a great deal. "Cookie time," Emma announced, presenting a plate stacked precariously high with still warm chocolate chip cookies. "After dinner," Sophie clarified gently, seeing her daughter's face fall slightly. "But I think we could each have one cookie appetizer while we set the table, don't you?" Emma's expression brightened immediately. "Yes. Uncle Nathan made spaghetti too, with the sauce from the garden tomatoes like you showed him last time." Sophie raised an eyebrow at Nathan, who shrugged modestly. "I paid attention during your cooking lesson, though I can't promise it's as good as yours." "It's better," Emma declared loyally, already munching on her cookie appetizer. "Uncle Nathan said the secret ingredient is love." Something in the way Nathan's eyes met Sophie's over Emma's head made her heart beat faster. There it was again, that unspoken current between them, growing stronger with each passing day. As they settled into dinner, Sophie found herself studying Nathan surreptitiously. At 43, he carried his success with a humility that made it impossible to resent. The past 2 years had softened something in him as well, the solitary workaholic CEO gradually transformed by the simple joys of building blocks on the living room floor and impromptu cookie baking sessions. "You're staring," Nathan observed quietly while Emma was distracted by a particularly challenging piece of spaghetti. "Just thinking," Sophie replied. "Dangerous activity," he teased. "Care to share?" I was remembering something you said too. Me that first morning in your house, when I woke up confused and scared. You told me that everyone deserves one more chance. She smiled softly. I had no idea then how completely that chance would change our lives. Nathan's expression grew more serious. I meant it then, and I mean it now. But you're the one who did the hard work, Sophie. You took that chance and transformed it into something remarkable. After dinner, while Nathan washed dishes despite Sophie's protests, she took Emma upstairs for her bath and bedtime routine. As she helped her daughter into her pajamas, pink ones with dinosaurs wearing tutus, Emma's current obsession, Sophie marveled at how securely her child had bounced back from their earlier hardships. Emma's trust in the world had been restored so completely that she showed no traces of the instability that had marked her early months. She was confident, joyful, and possessed a natural empathy that Sophie suspected came from their shared journey. Just last week, Emma had insisted on donating half her stuffed animals to kids who need them more, a decision Sophie had supported with tear-filled eyes. Can Uncle Nathan read my story tonight? Emma asked as Sophie tucked her into bed, her room a cozy haven of books, stuffed animals, and a star projector that cast constellations across the ceiling. If he's still here when you're ready, sweet pea, Sophie answered, not wanting to presume on Nathan's time. He'll be here, Emma said with the absolute certainty of childhood. He likes being with us. The simple observation, delivered with such conviction, touched something deep in Sophie's heart. I think you're right, she agreed softly. I'll go see if he's finished with the dishes. Downstairs, Sophie found Nathan arranging the last of the clean dishes in the drying rack, the kitchen spotless. He had removed his tie hours ago, and with his sleeves rolled up and his collar unbuttoned, he looked relaxed in a way he rarely appeared at the office. Emma has requested you for story duty, Sophie informed him, leaning against the doorframe. If you have time, that is. I know you're busy. Never too busy for Emma's bedtime story, Nathan replied immediately, his face lighting up. It's the highlight of my day. As he passed her in the doorway, he paused, their proximity suddenly electric. For a moment, Sophie thought he might kiss her, something that hadn't yet happened, despite the growing closeness between them. Instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I'll be down after the story, he said softly. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. The seriousness in his tone sent a flutter of anticipation through Sophie as she watched him climb the stairs to Emma's room. Taking advantage of the moment alone, she stepped out onto the back porch, breathing in the warm evening air scented with the roses she had planted along the fence. Her small backyard was a source of immense pride, a space transformed from bare dirt to a thriving garden through weekends of labor. Emma had her own little patch where carrots and sunflowers grew in cheerful disarray. A swing hung from the sturdy oak tree, and solar lights twinkled along the pathway Sophie had laid herself, one paver at a time. This home, this life, it had been built methodically, thoughtfully, through consistent effort and clear vision. So different from her relationship with Ryan, which had been all whirlwind romance and impulsive decisions, ultimately built on an unstable foundation that had collapsed when tested. The sliding door opened behind her, and Nathan stepped out onto the porch. She was asleep before we finished the second page, he said with a soft laugh. Mid-sentence, just out like a light. She had an exciting day, Sophie replied, making room for him on the porch swing. Volcano experiments and cookie baking with her favorite person. Nathan sat beside her, the swing gently swaying with their combined weight. For a few moments, they simply enjoyed the peaceful evening and each other's company, the silence comfortable between them. What did you want to talk about? Sophie finally asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Nathan took a deep breath, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been offered a position on the National Economic Advisory Council, he said. It would mean spending 1 week each month in Washington, D.C. for the next 2 years. Nathan, that's incredible, Sophie said, sincerely understanding the prestige of such an appointment. What an honor to be selected. It is, he agreed, and the work would be meaningful, helping shape economic policies that support innovation and entrepreneurship across the country. The Foundation's models for community investment would be part of what I'd bring to the role. Sophie studied his expression, sensing there was more. But it would mean being away from Portland regularly, he continued, turning to face her more directly. Away from the company, from the Foundation, from you and Emma. The implication of his words that she and Emma factored significantly into his decision-making sent a warm current through Sophie's chest. Before I give them my answer, Nathan said carefully, I needed to know, where do you see us, Sophie? This thing between us that we've never quite defined, but that feels more important to me with each passing day. The directness of the question momentarily took Sophie's breath away. For months, they had been dancing around the evolving nature of their relationship, neither wanting to disrupt the comfortable rhythm they had established. I see someone who started as my rescuer, she began thoughtfully, became my benefactor, then my employer, my friend, and now. She paused, gathering her courage. Now you're someone I can't imagine my life without. Someone Emma adores. Someone I've grown to care for deeply. Nathan's eyes, always expressive, filled with a hope that made him look younger, more vulnerable. Deeply enough to try building something together? Not just the friendship we have now, but something more? I've been afraid, Sophie admitted softly. After Ryan, I promised myself I'd never rush into another relationship. Never let Emma get attached to someone who might disappear. But you've proven yourself in 1,000 small ways over 2 years, Nathan. You've been consistent, respectful, patient. She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. Emma and I have our own lives now, stable, secure lives we built with your help, but ultimately through our own efforts. If we welcome you into that life more fully, it would be a choice made from strength, not dependence. The distinction was important to Sophie, and she could see from Nathan's expression that he understood its significance. Unlike when they first met her at her most vulnerable, him in a position of power, they now stood on more equal ground, her success at Reed, innovations earned through merit, her home purchased through her own diligent saving, her future secured through her own planning. That's exactly what I've waited for, Nathan said, squeezing her hand gently. For you to know beyond any doubt that your feelings, whatever they might be, come from a place of choice rather than gratitude or obligation. They do, Sophie assured him. What I feel for you has nothing to do with what you've done for me and everything to do with who you are, your integrity, your kindness, your dedication to making a difference. The way you get down on the floor to play with Emma, even in your expensive suits. The way you remember how everyone at the Foundation likes their coffee. The way you built a successful company without losing your humanity along the way. Nathan's expression softened with emotion. When I found you on that bus, I had no idea you would end up changing my life as much as I might have changed yours. Before you and Emma, I had achievements, success, material comfort, but I was lonely in ways I didn't fully recognize until you both showed me what I was missing. The honesty of his confession touched Sophie deeply. So what does this mean for the advisory position? Will you take it? I'd like to, Nathan admitted. The work is important. But I don't want it to disrupt what we're building here. He gestured between them. This matters more. Why does it have to be either or? Sophie challenged gently. You've created a company culture that supports work-life balance for your employees. Shouldn't the CEO benefit from that too? Nathan looked thoughtful. What are you suggesting? Take the position, Sophie said firmly. 1 week a month in D.C. isn't insurmountable. We can make it work. Maybe sometimes Emma and I could join. You for a weekend. She's never seen the National Air and Space Museum. You'd be willing to try? Nathan asked, hope evident in his voice. More than willing, Sophie replied with a smile. I think it's time we stop pretending we're just friends, don't you? Nathan's answer came not in words but in action. Leaning forward, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt like both a beginning and a culmination, gentle yet certain, carrying the weight of their shared history and the promise of a future together. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and sincere. I've been waiting 2 years to do that. Worth the wait? Sophie asked, a hint of teasing in her tone. Despite the emotion of the moment. Every second, Nathan confirmed, kissing her again briefly. Though I wouldn't object to making up for lost time. They sat together on the porch swing as darkness fell completely, talking about practical matters, how they would navigate their professional relationship at Reed Innovations, how they would explain the change to Emma, how they would balance Nathan's new responsibilities in Washington with their life in Portland. One step at a time, Nathan suggested when the questions began to pile up. We've both learned that the best things can't be rushed. Sophie nodded, leaning against his shoulder as they gazed at the stars appearing overhead. When I fell asleep on your shoulder that night, I never imagined we'd end up here. I had a feeling, Nathan admitted with a smile she could hear in his voice. Not about us specifically, but that there was something significant about our meeting. Call it intuition or fate or just lucky timing. I used to think my life was defined by bad luck, Sophie reflected. My parents dying young, meeting Ryan, ending up homeless with a baby. But now I wonder if those challenges were preparing me for something better, teaching me resilience, discernment, gratitude for the simple things. Nathan's arm tightened around her shoulders. You've certainly taught me about gratitude. Watching you rebuild your life piece by piece, never taking anything for granted, it's changed how I see the world. Inside the house, a small monitor on the side table crackled with the sound of Emma stirring, a reminder of the precious life sleeping upstairs, the center around which both their worlds now revolved. I should check on her, Sophie said, reluctantly pulling away from Nathan's embrace. She sometimes gets disoriented if she wakes up in the dark. I'll wait, Nathan promised, releasing her with a gentle squeeze. Upstairs, Sophie found Emma, half awake, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. Mama? She mumbled sleepily. I'm here, sweet pea, Sophie soothed, sitting on the edge of the bed and smoothing her daughter's tangled curls. Everything's okay. Go back to sleep. Is Uncle Nathan still here? Emma asked, her eyes already drifting closed again. Yes, he's still here, Sophie confirmed softly. Good, Emma murmured, snuggling deeper into her pillow. He should stay. Forever. The innocent observation, delivered through the haze of sleep, brought tears to Sophie's eyes. Maybe he will, sweet pea, she whispered. Maybe he will. When Emma was fully asleep again, Sophie returned downstairs to find Nathan in the living room, studying the framed photographs on the mantel snapshots of Emma's growth over the past 2 years, of Sophie's graduation from the paralegal certification program, of their life's joyful moments captured and preserved. She asked if you were still here, Sophie told him, moving to stand beside him. Then she said you should stay forever. Nathan turned to her, his expression a complex mixture of hope and uncertainty. How would you feel about that? Not literally. Forever, not yet, but more permanently in your lives? The question hung in the air between them, weighty with implication, yet buoyed by possibility. Sophie considered it carefully, honoring the magnitude of what was being discussed. I would feel, she said finally, reaching for his hand, like, sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. Like falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder on a rainy night bus and waking up to a whole new life. Nathan's smile was luminous in the dim light of the living room. Not the conventional start to a love story, but a real one, Sophie countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again, this time with greater confidence. The kind built on respect and friendship first, on seeing each other at our worst and our best. As Nathan drew her into his arms, Sophie reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperation to stability, from gratitude to partnership, from strangers to family. The path had not been straight or simple, but each step, even the painful ones, had led here. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a soothing rhythm that took Sophie back to that fateful night on the bus. The rain had seemed so threatening then, another hardship in a life already overflowing with challenges. Now it sounded like music, like promise, like the whispered reminder that sometimes life's most difficult moments are merely preludes to its greatest joys. "Stay," Sophie whispered against Nathan's lips, no longer afraid of what the future might hold. "Not forever, just tonight. We'll figure out the rest as we go." "One step at a time," Nathan agreed, holding her close as the rain fell steadily. Outside, washing the world clean for a new beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.